Hello, my beautiful people. My name is Dr. Catel. Welcome to another episode of Basic Nigerian History. Let's get started. Now, last episode, we discussed how Nigeria transitioned from a military government. This episode, we're going to talk about how the new president of Nigeria, Shehu Shagari, literally shagged the nation. French, but the guy and his government really did a nasty number on the country. Let's go. National Party of Nigeria, NPN won. Awolowo's UPN, who had been their closest rivals, refused to acknowledge them. NPN then made a pointless coalition with MPP. I say pointless because they immediately started acting just like the First Republic and got allies from all the other parties, allies for access to power and wealth. Instead of representing the interest of the masses, instead the interest of diverse members that had allied with them. This made the government appear unfocused with no clear goal. At least the First Republic had a northernization agenda. This republic was just saying, let's steal as much money as possible. Basically, we're about to enter a terrible period for Nigeria, a period filled with corruption, bad governance, and economic decline, all the way from 1979 to 1983. The only thing that the new government and their allies cared about was enriching themselves and their supporters so they could stay in power and therefore continue enriching themselves. You see the cycle that we're going through. Millions upon millions of dollars just kept going missing. Here's a bunch of small examples. An audit of Nigerian external telecommunications revealed 53 million naira had just gone missing. Poof! Vanish, just like that. 43 million naira disappeared from a federal housing scheme. NYSC officials stole 16 million naira, and contracts for the Federal Capital Territory was grossly inflated. Also, one manager of Nigerian National Supply Company in London stole about 1.9 million pounds in a year. And this was in a time, I'm saying all these millions of nairas, but this was in a time when the million of nairas was actually something, you know? Obviously, it was getting bad, but it's not as bad as it is today. State governments struggled and failed to pay public servants like teachers, professors, nurses, and so on. Schools and universities regularly went on strike. A lot of people were made redundant. Unemployment rose like bread in an oven. Of course, this meant crime increased, especially in the south. Black markets of smuggled goods emerged like cars, petrol, construction materials, cigarettes, alcohol, foodstuffs. Corruption spread deeply into all aspects of society as all workers took bribes to offset low wages. Basically, everybody had to take bribes, otherwise they just couldn't survive. Labor unions tried to fight back against these super low wages with strikes, but there was no luck. The government didn't really care and didn't really need these people. It had oil. Some people turned to religion to save them. Most religious communities were peaceful, self-help organizations that saw community solidarity as an alternative to Nigerian citizenship, where the community looks out for each other. But others engaged with the goal of bringing change in the government and were made more radical and willing to fight anything and anyone. In 1980, the Militant movement emerged in Kano. They were a militant radical group directly opposed to the Nigerian government, which they claimed was filled with infidels. They smuggled weapons into Kano and got a lot of followers and supporters because Nigerians were disaffected with their government. The state government of Kano tried to force them out, and this sparked riots in which over 5,000 people were killed and military had to be called to put it down. In the same year of 1980, the US jacked up their interest rates to around 20% to solve a domestic problem in the US. Nations in the global south, like South America, Africa, South Asia, all the nations in those areas had been in debt and they couldn't keep up, and they slid to the brink of default. Wall Street would have collapsed if this happened, so the suits at Wall Street spoke to the US government to help. The US government then ordered the International Monetary Fund (IMF) to roll the debts over, but on the condition of a Structural Adjustment Programme known as SAP, which meant privatizing all the companies and made life difficult for the citizens in those nations. The SAP was basically austerity measures. it would not only make life difficult for the citizens of the poor nations, but it would also force millions into poverty. It also meant the governments of these nations would no longer be in charge of their own economies. They were surrendering power to the global northern nations. At first, nobody in Africa dared to go against the global north, except for Thomas Sankara, a democratic leader of Burkina Faso and a brilliant young social reformer. He stood up in the African Union meeting one day and gave a speech urging African leaders to simply default on their debts rather than pay and accept SAP. 3 months later, he was assassinated in a French-backed coup. By 1980, Nigeria had lost 2.5 million worker days, as over 200,000 workers had 416 registered strikes. In 1981, workers shut down nearly all essential services and businesses in Nigeria. Even oil workers took part, and they could have been killed for it because the government don't play with their oil, but they still took part. At the same time, oil prices dropped significantly. Nigeria fell into a recession. The economy became even worse than it was. Now that we were low on money, instead of changing their ways and restructuring the economy to start making money, the government decided to turn towards foreign aid. In 1982, the government took 1.5 billion naira in foreign aid from the International Monetary Fund and secured a 400 million naira loan from Saudi Arabia. Still, the economy continued to decline as they continued their stupidly corrupt ways. People in power kept chopping all of that money. In 1982, religious riots ignited in Kano, in which Muslims burnt churches, and riots quickly spread to Zaria and Kaduna. Around the same time, the Matatsin movement was officially banned, but it didn't fully go away until much later on. The 1983 elections were coming up, and Shagari's government wanted to appear like they cared about the people. Instead of working to solve the economic problems and address the core issues of a corrupt system, the government started searching for a scapegoat. In early 1983, around January and February, the government put the blame on migrant workers that were in Nigeria and said that's why times were hard. Classic divide and conquer strategy. The worst part is Nigeria fell for it hook, line and sinker. The government then proceeded to expel many immigrant workers from the country, most of whom were from Ghana. This is where the Ghana Must Go movement came from. As many as 2 million people may have been expelled from Nigeria. This move was popular within Nigeria as they thought this would mean all their problems would now be fixed, but it was heavily criticized by all other African governments who saw it as a breach of the ECOWAS protocol. All this resentment didn't bother Shagari's National Party of Nigeria. They had already secured the right supporters in the right areas, and even though they failed to pay public servants, they managed to raise the police force from 10,000 to 100,000. They had also increased spending on arming the police force with weapons and equipment usually reserved for the army. It almost seems like they were afraid of their own people. I wonder why. The new police force brutally put down any protest and any form of criticism of the government. During the 1983 elections, opposition parties tried to combine against Shagari's MPN, but found it impossible. They fought amongst each other constantly, and a lot of the important ones enjoyed the patronage bribery system that MPN had set up, so they didn't really join. MPN leaders were so confident that they apparently declared there are only two parties in Nigeria, the MPN and the military. Can you imagine? By this time, Nigerians' reserves/savings had declined from about 5.4 billion naira to just 798 million naira. It was not enough to cover 1 month's imports for the country. The country was absolutely broke. But the politicians, now they were rich. In August of 1983, Shagari and MPN were returned to power in a landslide victory, but they still cheated even though they already had the upper hand. The numbers were outlandish and skewed so much in MPN's favor that it was obvious to everyone that widespread fraud had occurred. Elections were marred by corruption and violence. MPN was using its new police force to stop opposition parties from campaigning and meeting. The election was also marred by vote rigging, which led to legal battles over the results. For example, an election of an MPN candidate in Yoruba's Ondo State provoked riots that left hundreds dead and federal property destroyed. Eventually, the decision was overturned and given back to a UPN candidate, which was the party led by Awolowo. In the same year, oil revenue dropped from 12 billion naira to about 7 billion, and oil production was at 1.3 million barrels per day. At the same time, inflation in Nigeria rose to between 30 to 50%, and what it showed was that Nigeria as a nation was completely dependent on oil revenue. In 1983, Nigeria's external debt had grown from the $9 billion it was in the beginning of Shagari's regime to $18 billion. So we more than doubled in this guy's regime. That's how much money they were just wasting and stealing. Shagari really shagged the country. Pardon my French. He really did a number on us. During this whole time, ECOWAS was becoming increasingly irrelevant, as even Nigeria, who was the strongest member in ECOWAS, was now also becoming indebted to the Western powers. Some member states couldn't afford their obligation to the organization. Others saw it as a veiled attempt by Nigeria to achieve dominance over West Africa. Internally, Nigeria was ruining the lives of its own citizens, and externally, it was losing all the respect of everybody. It was terrible. It was just a terrible time. The Nigerian people had had enough. They themselves started calling for military intervention. You know what this means, right? Yeah, you guessed it. Stay tuned for the next episode where we're going to continue and talk about what happens next. I'm pretty sure you guys already know what's going to happen next. But just in case, tell me what you think is going to happen next now that the Nigerian people are fed up with Shagari and the way he's shagging the country left, right, and center. Also, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, join us, share, spread the word, drop a comment, all kinds of stuff. All of this stuff helps us beat the YouTube algorithm, helps more people see this. I think this is very, very important. This particular course we're doing here is very important for Nigerians. So if you guys can continue to share and spread the word and like it and comment and subscribe and all those lovely things, I would really appreciate it. Dr. Catel out.